I think people die at peace when their relationships with people that they care about are peaceful, where they may not agree on everything. They may not appreciate every single thing about a loved one and whatnot, but they come together. I accept you, you accept me. It's my time. I've given you everything I can to succeed. You're doing well. There's a peace that comes with knowing that relationships are strong and that they'll be okay.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. When push comes to shove, what really matters most to you in this life? That may be the most important question any of us can ask ourselves. And getting the answer right may be more important than almost anything else on this side of the grave. My guest on this episode shares a perspective on what matters most that she's acquired from almost 2 decades on the front lines of end-of-life care. I think all of us need to hear what she has to say so we can evaluate and calibrate our priorities before the Grim Reaper comes a-calling. Fair warning, my guest's message to us is delivered in the context of stories from her experiences serving those who are dying. Some of her stories are inherently heartwarming, but one story in particular is harder to hear. I think both kinds of stories are invaluable in their ability to help us truly and courageously confront our own mortality so that we're motivated to live with guts, gusto, and abandon right now, so that we don't keep putting off the things that matter most until the ever-elusive tomorrow. I personally hope that you'll keep listening. This conversation impacted me deeply, but I wanted you to know in advance what to expect so you can make your own decision. The Reverend Dr. Nicole McDonald is a native of Hampton, Virginia, and she's by far the most highly educated guest I've ever had on this show. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, a Master of Divinity degree, a Master of Science in Patient Counseling, and a Doctor of Ministry degree, too. Currently, Nicole is a PhD student in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. And somehow, in the midst of all of that academic work, Nicole was also able to serve as a hospice chaplain for 13 years, providing emotional and spiritual support to patients living with terminal illnesses. Today, she serves as a bereavement coordinator and chaplain for Sentara Hospice in Newport News, Virginia. Nicole's degrees and experience certainly lend her a certain kind of credibility right out of the gate. But behind all of the impressive academic accomplishments and professional experience is a woman deeply interested in the human condition, in what it truly means to live and die well, and helping the dying transition well, and a woman deeply committed to not only imparting what she's learned to others, but embodying it in her own life too. And I think you'll agree that in the final analysis, those qualities are a form of credibility that rival any other. Without further ado, I'm thrilled to welcome you to this transformative conversation with my new friend, the Reverend Dr. Nicole McDonald. Nicole, what single experience has impacted you the most during your 15 or 16 years of bereavement and chaplaincy work, and how?
Well, the experience that comes to mind is I was a chaplain to a man who his family was a member of the church that I was a part of. And this man was kind of like the family outcast. So he had lots of siblings, but he was the one that was the outcast, the one that was addicted to drugs, the one that couldn't hold a job and all of those things, what we deem as, a horrible person, right? When I went to see him, now, mind you, I'm the chaplain with this organization that I work for, not representing the church. But because our families went to the same church, he knew who I was and his siblings were there. And so, we're all sitting around talking and catching up. And so finally, I get the patient by himself. We go in his room and we're chit-chatting. And he starts to cry. And I'm kind of like, well, what are those tears about? And his response was, he knew God was real because the church sent someone to look after him in his time of need. I'm starting to tear up now because it was just such a touching experience where this outcast, even the church considered this man an outcast. His family considered him an outcast. But because of my presence and my affiliation with the church, he knew God was real. Because in that moment, he felt and experienced an unconditional love, that he had not been forgotten. So that's been the most impactful experience for me to have been used in that way. To touch this man's life is incredible. And it just reminds me of the fact that no matter what people experience in life, no matter how they're different, no matter how they're not the norm, they're important and they're valuable to God, and they ought to be valuable to me.
And how far along in your work did that experience occur?
Maybe 8 years ago.
About halfway through your tenure so far.
Yeah.
How did that impact your work from that point forward?
That experience is a constant reminder of no matter what I'm experiencing. We go into people's homes. That's what we do. We go into people's homes and provide this support. So as the chaplain and bereavement coordinator, I'm the spiritual and emotional support. And we see people in their most vulnerable state. I don't know about you, but there are places in my house where I don't want people to go.
No, I don't have any of those, Nicole. No.
But I think, when you think about people's lives, not only in their house, but there's places in their hearts and in their minds that they don't let people go. And I would gather that maybe they don't even let God go. And so doing this ministerial work, it's about no matter what I see, I cannot pass judgment because they're letting me in this most vulnerable state, in this most private area. Oftentimes we're meeting in their bedrooms because they're bedbound. And so it's a constant reminder to value the person in front of me, regardless of the living conditions, regardless of the family dynamics, the dysfunction, that they are human and they should be treated as such.
That is really beautiful. And I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. That helps me a lot. And something that I've sort of formulated over the past few years is just this idea of life being a baseball diamond. And I was never a baseball player. Well, I played t-ball, but I was really crappy at that and didn't have a long career there. And but just this idea that all of us are born somewhere on the baseball diamond of life. Maybe we're in the batter's box getting ready to be up to bat. Maybe we're the batter. Maybe we're on first base hoping we're going to get to second. Home base being like the ultimate destination once you've rounded all the bases. Or maybe, we're even not yet in the stadium, not yet even on the team. And that just metaphorically represents, the various starting points people can have in life, from born with a silver spoon in your mouth and all kinds of opportunity, which is maybe like born on third base or rounding third base on your way to home in terms of material and emotional resourcing for someone in life. And and then maybe someone in the batter's box, they're born into conditions that we would typically call much more challenging, impoverished, or an emotionally or physically abusive situation. And I think something that I've learned a lot through my own work is similar to you, but from a different perspective. And that is that everybody starts somewhere in the baseball diamond of life. And, the man you're discussing, like, who knows why his life unfolded the way that he did, why he made the choices that he did. But in God's estimation, is it possible that maybe he was in the batter's box and the best he could do was like get up to bat? We would still, sadly view that man's life a loss or a tragedy in some ways. But isn't it possible that God views that man's life in some ways as a victory? Because his starting point was different than the person born with a silver spoon in their mouth rounding third on the way to home. And what you shared just reminded me of that. And I really want to keep that in mind, that, again, we don't judge a book by its cover, and there's beauty in everyone and there's value in every human life. And it came to mind as you were talking about that, you've got so much experience dealing with people in crisis, dealing with people who are getting ready to encounter their final breath, dealing with the family and friends around them. It's so common for us to come alongside people in crisis with platitudes and empty words And often, in my opinion, it's an attempt to distance ourselves from the pain, to say it's going to be okay there, because like for us, we need this to be fine as soon as it can be, because I'd like to get away from this encounter with mortality as soon as I can. Mm-hmm. Long preamble simply to ask, from your experience, what are some ways that we come alongside people in crisis effectively? That people like me and ordinary folks who don't spend as much time in those trenches know.
I would say the most effective thing that we can do is to ask people what they need. How can I help? What do you need? I think many times we go in, like you said, with these preconceived notions of, we're just going to go in, especially religious people. We're going to go in and pray with them, and then, all is well, and I'm going to leave as soon as possible. When people are on their deathbed, just waiting for death, I mean, they have a lot of issues. Some people have issues with, regrets and guilt. I am really surprised by the number of religious folks who really struggle with this idea of heaven and hell and really struggle with, where am I going?
And you're saying religious people who have embraced a form of spirituality over the course of their lives, when it comes to that moment, they're still wrestling with it.
Yes. Oftentimes just because they've been a part of organized religion and they've just taken these things for granted. Whatever the pastor said, whatever the leader said, and has never really wrestled with what they believe and why they believe it. And so now when they're on their deathbed, they're in a crisis because now they have to wrestle with these things. There is nothing stopping them. So I would say the best thing that we can do is just be present and listen and ask people what they need. Some people just don't want to be bothered. They don't want people around, like physically. They'll say, phone call is fine, check in with me, but I don't want to visit. I don't want extra people. I don't want to bring attention to myself. I don't want people to know. Surprisingly, there's shame around death and dying. I view it as it's a normal part of life. So no matter what your illness is, no matter what your age, like it's normal. There shouldn't be any necessarily like shame around it. It's a process. And some of us experience that process sooner than others. But we're all going to go through it. So that's my suggestion, that people just try to be present and see what the family needs, that are supporting the patient who's experiencing this process, and just really try to figure out what they need and meet their needs. Oftentimes, families don't want to ask other people for support because I don't know whether it's just an American thing of, this is going on in my house. I don't want to share it with a bunch of other people. But if you know that someone is a primary caregiver and they don't have a lot of support, maybe they just need a cooked meal. Maybe that's going to help them so that they don't have to cook and that they can, do other things that's a part of their caregiving duties.
So don't assume that we understand what people need. Really go in with curiosity and allow their expressed needs to be the needs we actually attempt to meet.
Yeah. And if you're in the house and you're observing, maybe there's some obvious things around the house that you see. If you walk into a house and, you're friends with them and you see a bunch of dishes in the sink, just wash the dishes.
Yeah.
It's not that hard to support people, but I think we just make it harder than it needs to be. Because like you said, we're dealing with our own stuff and we're, pushing it away.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, isn't it? That if we're going to really support someone as they approach their final encounter with mortality, we've got to go there with them. We've got to be in that mortal space, in that space of impending death. And it seems to me there's something in human nature that, like the work that I do, I try to get myself and those that I serve as close to genuine embrace of our personal mortality as I can, because I think that's a really healthy place to be. But I've just discovered there's this gap that can't quite be closed. Like we can only get so close to the reality of our own mortality. There's something almost like completely impervious to our attempts to break through that we only break through once it's actually happening. And it seems really difficult. And my sister actually has acknowledged this when her husband was in his final days, that it was very difficult for her to actually be there with him and to stop fighting for his life and to acknowledge he's now moving toward his death, and just to be there with them, because we don't want that. I don't want you to go away. I want you to be here. And if I just come and be with you in your moments of passing, then I'm acknowledging this is really happening. There's just this profound denial that we can't seem to get through. Has that been your experience too?
Oh, absolutely. There are many people who need hospice that their family says, no, hospice means we're giving up, and we're not going to give up. And so we're just going to keep on fighting. And so they actually die, or they're in this process of dying without the support that they need, because what hospice does is we bring in the nurse, the CNA to give baths, the chaplain, the social worker. Prayerfully, all that goes in so that the caregiver can be with the patient that is dying. And when I say be with, I mean be present. So if my mother is dying, hospice will allow me to be the daughter in the situation as much as I can. You know, we're not there 24 hours, of course, but there's an element of, if you're getting this support, this medical, this emotional support, then you can be the daughter, the son, the spouse, and be present.
What a gift. That is a beautiful gift. I have ever understood hospice through that lens.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful gift. But oftentimes people don't want to let go so that they can be. And I think that's what you have to do. You have to, in essence, kind of let go of this world and what the world offers and the movements of the world with regards to, you've got to do A, B, C, D, you got to go to work, you have to let go of those things so that you can be present during this time of transition for your loved one. And that's hard.
That is hard. What is the most, or one of the most memorable deaths? That's such a weird question. But I mean, memorable deaths you've ever been a part of, in the sense that the loved ones and people close to the one dying were more able than most to be there in the death process. And the one dying was also able to be there and just let it happen. Does any particular experience come to mind?
So not in that sense.
Okay.
I think our hospice team does a good job that eventually we get there. Like that is what we are here to do as a hospice group. That is our goal. That is our mission. And so those are more common in our field.
Because those who bring in hospice have already sort of crossed a threshold. Okay.
Yes, they've already started, the revelation or the letting go, because we're in there.
Got it.
What our team does is continue to reinforce conversations around death and dying. We continue to push, nudge, prod the family and the patient towards that, because we have to have questions as far as, have you chosen a funeral home? Do you have a DNR, a do not resuscitate? So even in our every interaction with the patient and their family, it's a reminder that you're on this train and it's moving, and it might be moving slow, but it is still moving. And so that experience of the patient and the family being together, sitting with one another, that is our goal, and that's what we do. Now, the most memorable death that I experienced was a bad death, actually. So I really believe in all of my work that you die how you live, generally speaking.
Will you say that again? I want to hear that again.
You die like you live, generally speaking. So this particular death was a bad death. So this man came on our service. He was in a facility, and he was younger, like maybe in his late 50s. I think that's pretty young considering our age these days. This was when I was working for a rural hospice. And so he was in a facility, and he didn't have any family, and he didn't have any friends. And the only story that we got from his background is that he was a mean man. He was mean. I remember being called out to see him. And I think it was more so just the nurse that was caring for him was, having a lot of anxiety and whatnot. And so, I just thought, hey, I'll just go check it out, see what's going on. So I go in there and, he's clearly agitated and they had given him meds and he is unable to speak. So he is really on the verge of transitioning, but he's very agitated. And so I'm sitting in there trying to do what I do, trying to find ways to comfort him. So I am really just praying. And all of a sudden, he just starts having these jerks, these body jerks, and he just is jerking uncontrollably. I don't know what to describe it as, but he's jerking uncontrollably. It looks like he's in pain. Now I'm about to go get a nurse because I can't do anything about that, But as soon as I get up, boom, he dies. I can still see this today. And this happened 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. And I can still see his face today and see his body jerking. And that was probably the saddest death I've ever experienced. If it wasn't for me, he would have been alone. It looked like he was fighting the devil. It was bad. It was bad.
Well, I'm so glad you shared that. I've never had anybody share their actual perspective on someone, to use your words, transitioning, because that's hard to hear. And I'm really glad that we're having to hear that, because that takes us one skosh closer to acknowledging that this does happen. And in this occasion, it was, sad and tragic the way this person passed, but people are passing like that every day. How does that contrast with, well, you said bad deaths, so I'll say good deaths?
I would describe a good death as in someone who has made peace with this death and dying process and who is dying around family, whether they are blood family or not, dying around people who legitimately love and care for the person. That's how I would describe a good death. But I also think there's a lot of people that die alone. And for me, that is like the saddest thing that you could ever experience is to die alone.
Which I think speaks to, for those of us who are still living, really the inestimable value. And you're having the emotion of that even as you're describing it, aren't you? And
yeah,
just the inestimable, I should have picked a different word, value of relationships in life.
Absolutely.
And I've been chewing on lately how, and this mortality work has helped me a lot with this, just pushing through the illusion that there's security in life. Because we like to think, well, I've got a good job with a good company, the good pension and insurance, and there's security in that. And I call BS on that, honestly. I mean, that company goes down. I mean, all number of things could dismantle that security in a moment. Or there's security in my material possessions. Again, could be gone, in a breath. And the thing that I've discovered, like, if there's any security to be had in this life, it's in the quality of the bonds of love and friendship that we form with people. And not necessarily the number of the bonds of friendship and love that we form, but in the quality of the ones that we actually do form. Because that, to me, feels so solid. I mean, if I in my life crap the bed completely right now, there's scores of people I know who love me and care about me and want my best, who would rally to my side. That feels like the most solid place I can find in life, apart from the spiritual realm. And it's not really apart from the spiritual realm, in my opinion, but the realm that we can see and feel and touch and taste on a regular basis.
You hit the nail on the head. I was going to say that how this job has impacted me, it has reshaped my understanding of relationships and my relationship with money.
Really? I didn't see the money part coming. Well, touch on the relationships part first and then hit the money.
Seeing so many families in dysfunction, experiencing families that really are like legit, loving, connected, and together and can make decisions together. And seeing how that plays out in someone who's dying. I would imagine that it is one of the hardest things in the world to be a parent and know that you're dying and know that your children don't have good relationships, right? Knowing that you're probably the glue that even keeps them remotely talking. People die at peace when their relationships with people that they care about are peaceful, where they may not agree on everything, they may not appreciate every single thing about a loved one and whatnot, but they come together. I accept you, you accept me. It's my time. I've given you everything I can to succeed. You're doing well. There's a peace that comes with knowing that relationships are strong and that they'll be okay. The money thing is that I've seen many people with money who are living miserable lives, or people with money that don't have not even two people that they can call on for support. But they've got all this money. They can pay people to come in, but they've missed out on these relationships. They've missed out on the value of the interconnectedness of life. Another way that it has changed my relationship with money is just in this idea of like insurance policies and things like that. So if I'm responsible for a family, I don't want to wait till my deathbed to figure out how I'm going to try to secure their future. So being on the bereavement side and helping people after their loved one is deceased, I've seen a lot of transitions that people didn't see coming. So they knew their loved one was dying, but they had no preparation as far as, if my loved one dies, I'm going to have to leave this house because the insurance policies don't cover the mortgage. I've seen able-bodied young mothers have to move in with family because their partner died and they can't live by themselves anymore. They don't have the money to support themselves.
Just compounds the stress and hardship, doesn't it?
It does. And oftentimes it keeps people stuck because they can't even grieve because they're worried about survival.
I had never considered that.
So this death of a loved one puts them in this even more vulnerable state of, how do I survive now? So that's how it's reshaped my whole thought around money. And also I've seen people with no money have the best deaths. When I was working out in rural Georgia, I remember distinctly, there was a family that lived in a trailer that did not have a floor. Their floor was dirt, but they had love. That was enough.
Well, thank you for that. That hits home deeply. And I know it's going to hit home for our listeners. And just to bullet point those two things. One is, do yourself a favor so that when your time comes, your relationships are in good shape. Do yourself the favor of, and it motivates the heck out of me to check my relationships and see where are there gaps or deficiencies or areas of dysfunction or things unsaid or things that have been said that haven't been mended. Go fix that stuff so that minimally you'll have the blessing of knowing that as you leave, those relationships are in good shape and those relationships are available to support you as you transition. Then secondarily, just for the love of God, let's beat this into our skulls that money is almost of no value ultimately. Of course, it has utility in life to secure the things that provide comfort and those kinds of things. But when it comes to ultimate value, you're saying the family in Georgia with the dirt floor, their loving relationships was the thing that was of ultimate value to them and motivates the heck out of me. Thank you for that. Any other ways that your experience with death over these many years has changed you that you'd like to highlight?
I think for me personally also, I've had a lot of experience in the hospital as well, dealing with traumatic death. One thing that always struck me is our denial of our health. Generally speaking, I can remember I was in the ER and a man had come in and they had found him like passed out, at work or at home or whatever. And come to find out, instead of taking all of the full prescription of his medication, like his diabetes medication or whatever, he was cutting it in half, to be able to provide for his family or whatever. And so that's why he had this traumatic event. And so I'm trying to sit there and support the wife who's crying and is upset. And this has come as a surprise to her. And she's telling me, that he was in good health. And now I've been around, I've been in and out of his room and, overheard doctors and stuff. And this man was on a lot of medication. And so sometimes I know that we lull ourselves in believing that our health is good. I'm only taking one med. Or my health is good. I'm only doing this and that. And so sometimes I would say that I've experienced a denial of the true measure of health. And I think that's very harmful. And I try not to do that. Not that I'm perfect in any way, shape, or form, but I do try to be real about my health, and honest with myself in the ways that I can improve. And I know that comes from seeing people time and time again with this complete unrealistic idea of what good health is.
How do you actually do that? Because you're not in the midst of a crisis yourself, confronted with realities that are very difficult to deny. So on a daily basis, what is the practice and the discipline that helps you be as honest as you possibly can with yourself about how you're actually doing?
Well, I have a therapist. So I do always, have a therapist that I go in and try to be as honest as possible. And
so I just want to, for the listener, say you've got a place and a person with whom truth telling is essential.
Yes.
So you're not leaving it up to your own devices.
Right.
Okay.
And
good.
And I pay her. So it doesn't benefit me to go in there and lie. I mean, it would be a waste of money.
Yeah. Well, and plus, like someone like that is more able than others potentially to go, hold up, Nicole, you're not telling it. Come on, be honest with me.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I do recognize that is a privilege to be able to afford a therapist through, insurance or whatever. And so I do recognize that's a privilege, but that is part of my check. And I also have, I think because of this job, I have really good relationships with friends that keep me in check. Friends that are intuitive who, I can really talk to, that can say, hey, Nicole, you sound a little off today. What's going on? Those types of things. And I have a wonderful family. We have our own dysfunctions, but we do love one another. I have a 83-year-old grandmother that will tell me you're getting fat. So I do have those checks as well to, get back on a health track. And I think it's really all about recognizing who you can be honest with, period. Whether it be your doctor, your therapist, your friends, yourself, like who are the people and places that aren't afraid to check you. And that check you in loving ways, or that you recognize as love.
Yeah, you can hear it. You actually can hear what they're saying.
Yeah.
And what sticks out to me is when I asked you what practices and disciplines are in place in your life, the only one that resembles a practice or a discipline was going to your therapist. But your therapist is a person. It's a relationship.
Right.
Every bit of your support structure for helping you tell the truth to yourself is a relationship.
Yeah. Because actually for me, my daily practices go in and out. So right now I'm on a social media fast, so I'm not checking my Instagram or Facebook. And so that has enabled me to implement some other things that, I started yoga this week. You just being in COVID, trying not to go to the gym. So trying to still be creative with exercise, because my grandmother told me last year that I was fat, and she was right. I had picked up some game.
Bless her heart.
Go ahead.
I had a mentor tell me the exact same thing one time. We were sitting down to a meeting and I was like, man, I'm just feeling kind of tired and this, that. And he looked at me and went, well, Andrew, you're fat. And it was one of the best gifts I've ever been given.
Right.
I mean, it hit me between the eyes when he said it. Then I looked down at my gut and I was like, Oh,
right. Yeah. So for me, the daily practices change, periodically throughout the year, throughout, how I age or whatever. But the relationships, that's the one thing for me that doesn't change.
Well, that's ringing through loud and clear in everything we're talking about today. As we kind of land the plane here, what do you want us to learn from your experience and your story? If there was anything you could bottle and give to us and we would get it exactly as you delivered it, what would it be?
That your relationships are your biggest asset. So treat them as such.
Beautiful. Thank you. And here's the question I told you I wasn't going to share with you until the very end. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
If you, Nicole, knew you were going to die 5 years from today, what would you begin doing differently today?
I think the only thing that I can truly think of right now is that I would increase my insurance policies on myself.
Yeah.
So that my family would be secure.
The reality is you might die 5 years from now. You might die today. You might die when you're 95.
Yeah, you're right.
But if that's your answer, why not do it?
Yeah, because that would be easy. Everything else in my life right now, I wouldn't change. I love my family. I love my friends. The job can come and go. It's a job. It's a career. It's not what I hang my hat on.
What part of the very pleasant and satisfying life you're experiencing now would you attribute to the lessons you've learned and implemented because of your work and your proximity to death on a regular basis?
I would definitely say the relationships. Not only my relationship with myself, I've worked hard on that as far as acceptance, love, no regrets, those types of things. But I've also worked hard on my relationships with my family, keeping those strong. And that I don't think I would value relationships as much as I do had it not been for this work.
Just left to your own devices, they're not nearly the central part of your life that they are today.
Right.
Well, we interact with mortality very, differently. Me through this and the graveyard groups and just my own unique experience with anxiety. You through your work professionally. But I would say for both of us, it's safe to say that we're very grateful for, well, yes, we're grateful for it, and it's profoundly improved our lives to be able to be in close proximity to mortality on a regular basis, whether with you through actual encounters of others' mortality and me just through having these kinds of conversations and doing the graveyard group. But it's just good to force ourselves to acknowledge that we are going to die, or to really wrestle with that and to ask ourselves, with that knowledge, what do we change now, and begin to change those things. And your story and your experience really just continues to drive that home for me. And Nicole, I can't thank you enough for your honesty today, for your vulnerability, for your emotions, for your wisdom, for your perspective. It's so valuable to me. I know it's going to be valuable to the listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And for all of you listening, remember, you are going to die, but you're not dead yet. So get after it. Your relationships are your biggest asset, so treat them as such. That's how Nicole summed up the one thing that she hopes we take away from her story and her experience. Our relationships are the most important thing in life, and the only thing left when we die. You can envision your relationships as a series of concentric circles. Think of it as your relationship radar screen. At the very center is you. Circles closer to the center represent relationships that are more important to you, and circles farther from the center represent relationships that are less important to you, relatively speaking. Plot the initials of the person with whom you have your most important relationship on the first circle. For some of you, that would be a spouse or partner, or maybe your closest friend. For others of you, that might be a parent or child. Whoever it is, though, force yourself to pick just one relationship for that first circle. Then, plot more initials on the other circles moving outward from the center, from more to less importance, again, relatively speaking. Next, consider the condition of the relationship that occupies the first circle on your relationship radar screen. What shape is it in? Where is it thriving? Where is it languishing? And what can you do about it? Give this relationship absolute top priority in terms of how you focus your time, energy, and attention. Continue your evaluation of the relationships in each circle, moving outward from there. What condition are they in? And what time, energy, and attention are you willing and able to give to those relationships? When it's our turn to die, it will be abundantly clear how well we tended to our most important relationships. We can't cram for that exam. We reap then what we're sowing today. Your relationships are your biggest asset. Are you treating them as such? How did this episode impact your perspective on your relationships? Message me on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Andrew Petty Coach, or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to follow this show, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.